A man sat across from an FBI informant, pulled out a paper napkin, and began drawing out a plan to kill the President of the United States. He sketched the details, he named the target, he negotiated the price, $5,000. That was the number he put on the life of Donald Trump. He didn't know the men he was hiring were federal agents. He didn't know every word he spoke was being recorded. And he didn't know that the very next day, a gunman named Thomas Crooks would open fire at a campaign rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, graze the ear of the man he had just plotted to kill, and send shockwaves through the entire American security apparatus. Asif Merchant, 47 years old, Pakistani national, was arrested on July 12, 2024, one day before Butler. And what came out of his trial this week is not just a courtroom story. It is a window into something far larger, far darker, and far more connected to everything that is happening in the Middle East right now than most people realize. Let's go inside this case. Because the details are extraordinary, Merchant didn't stumble into this plot. According to his own testimony, he was sent by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, Iran's most elite and most feared military and intelligence force. The same organization that has been financing Hezbollah for decades, the same organization that has been running proxy networks across the Middle East, funneling weapons to the Houthis, directing operations in Syria and Iraq. The same organization that American and Israeli forces are now systematically targeting as part of Operation Epic Fury. Merchant told the jury that the IRGC gave him a mission: kill American political figures, and not just any political figures. His list included Donald Trump, then President Joe Biden, and former Republican presidential candidate Nikki Haley, three of the most prominent political figures in the United States, on a kill list drawn up in Tehran and handed to a Pakistani middleman who was supposed to make it happen on American soil. Think about the scale of what that represents. This wasn't a lone wolf. This wasn't a random individual radicalized by internet videos in his bedroom. This was a state-directed assassination operation, authorized at the highest levels of the Iranian government, targeting sitting and former heads of state on American territory. And it almost worked. The only reason it didn't is because the men Merchant tried to hire as hitmen were not who he thought they were. He paid $5,000, or believed he was paying $5,000, to what he thought were contract killers. They were federal agents. The FBI had been watching him. They had placed an informant in his circle. They recorded everything, and when they had enough, they moved. But here is where the story gets even more disturbing. When FBI agent Jacqueline Smith interviewed Merchant after his arrest, she asked him about the shooting in Butler, about Thomas Crooks, about the attempt on Trump's life that happened the very day after Merchant was taken into custody. And Merchant's response was chilling. He told the agent that the Butler shooting looked like the kind of mission he had been sent to carry out. He said it fit. He said it corresponded to his assignment. Now, the FBI has repeatedly stated that it found no evidence connecting Crooks to any foreign actor or any co-conspirators. Crooks acted alone, according to every official investigation. That finding stands. But Merchant's comment reveals something important, regardless of whether there was a direct connection. It reveals that there were people on American soil, directed by Tehran, thinking about exactly this kind of attack. Planning it, preparing for it, looking at rallies, evaluating security, identifying vulnerabilities. Merchant himself was ordered by his Iranian handler to attend a Republican political rally, specifically to assess how it was protected. He chose not to go in person because he feared being identified, so he watched it online instead. Read that again. An IRGC operative was ordered to physically attend a Trump campaign event to study the security setup. That is not hypothetical. That is not speculation. That is testimony delivered under oath in a federal courtroom in Brooklyn, New York. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Less than 2 hours to reach a unanimous verdict on every single count. Guilty of murder for hire, guilty of attempted terrorism, guilty on all charges. When a jury comes back that fast, it means the evidence was overwhelming. It means there was no reasonable doubt in any direction. It means the case against Asif Merchant was airtight. He now faces a maximum sentence of life in prison. And whatever sentence he receives, the story does not end with him. Because Merchant is not the story. Merchant is a thread. And when you pull that thread, you see a much larger tapestry. Let's zoom out. Because the timing of this verdict, this week, while Operation Epic Fury is actively dismantling Iranian military infrastructure across the Middle East, is not just coincidental background noise. It is context, critical context. For years, Iran operated on the assumption that it could project violence into the heart of the Western world without facing direct military consequences. It could finance terrorism, it could run assassination plots, it could send operatives into American cities with kill lists in their pockets. And as long as it maintained plausible deniability, as long as it worked through cutouts and proxies and Pakistani middlemen, the response would be diplomatic protests, maybe some sanctions, maybe a few strongly worded statements from the State Department. That calculation is now being shattered, not metaphorically, literally, with airstrikes and torpedoes and the systematic elimination of the very networks and commanders that made operations like Merchant's possible. But here is what demands your full attention. The Merchant case is not ancient history. It is not a closed chapter that ended when the FBI made the arrest. It is a live illustration of a threat that did not disappear when the handcuffs went on. Because for every Asif merchant that the FBI identifies and catches, the question that keeps intelligence analysts awake at night is how many they don't identify, how many they don't catch, how many are operating right now on American soil, with IRGC direction and IRGC financing, waiting for the right moment. Attorney General Pam Bondi said it directly in her statement after the verdict. Merchant landed on American soil hoping to kill President Trump. Instead, she said, he ran into the full force of American law enforcement. That is a powerful line, and it deserves to be true, but it is only true because, in this particular case, the FBI got lucky enough or skilled enough to place an informant in exactly the right position at exactly the right time. The system worked this time. The question is whether the system is built to work every time against a network that is now under maximum pressure from the military operations in the Middle East, against operators who have learned from Merchant's mistakes, against a regime that, even as its warships sink and its missile systems burn, has not abandoned its commitment to exporting violence into the heart of the countries it considers enemies. There is another dimension to this case that deserves attention, the defense team's argument, because it tells you something important about how these operations work and why they are so difficult to prosecute and prevent. Merchant's lawyers told the jury that their client was coerced, that the IRGC threatened his family, that he had no choice, that he deliberately behaved incompetently because he wanted to get caught. They painted him as a man trapped between two systems of power, trying to navigate an impossible situation without getting his loved ones killed. The jury didn't buy it, and there are good reasons to be skeptical of that narrative. FBI agent Smith testified that in all her interactions with Merchant after his arrest, he never once expressed fear for his family. What he expressed, she said, was a desire to work in intelligence and get paid for it. That is not the profile of a man acting under duress. That is the profile of a man who saw an opportunity and took it. But the coercion defense matters as a concept, even if it failed in this specific case, because it is the defense that will be used again, by the next operative and the next. And it points to a genuine challenge in disrupting these networks. When the IRGC recruits assets in Pakistan, in Europe, in the United States, it often does so precisely by leveraging family connections, financial pressures, and religious obligations that make it genuinely difficult for recruits to refuse. That combination of threat and incentive is a deliberate recruitment strategy. It creates a gray zone of culpability that defense attorneys will exploit in every future case. Understanding that mechanism is not a reason for sympathy. It is a reason for strategy. If you want to disrupt IRGC recruitment networks, you need to understand exactly how they operate at the human level. You need to understand what makes someone like Asif Merchant say yes. And then you need to make saying yes impossible, either by removing the threat to families, by identifying and neutralizing the handlers before they can recruit, or by making the consequences of participation so certain and so severe that no amount of coercion makes the risk worth taking. The Merchant verdict sends a message, a loud one. But messages alone don't win this kind of war, because this kind of war is not fought on a battlefield you can photograph from a satellite. It is fought in apartments and hotel rooms, on encrypted messaging apps, over paper napkins in unremarkable locations, by people who look nothing like what most people imagine, when they think about terrorism. Operation Epic Fury is reshaping the Middle East in real time. But the front that Asif Merchant represents, the front that runs through the streets of Brooklyn and Chicago and London and Paris, that front is not being addressed by a single airstrike. It requires a different kind of operation, a longer one, a more patient one that is less spectacular and more structural. The FBI stopped one man with a napkin and a $5,000 budget. The next one might not use a napkin. The next one might not need a middleman at all. That is the lesson of this case, and it deserves to be heard.